This is the story of the Panther tank, Germany's sleek, lethal predator, born out of desperation, shaped by ambition, and feared across every front of World War II. But was it truly the best tank of the war, or is it a technological marvel crippled by its own complexity? Today, we're going deep into its design, its battles, and its legacy. It was sleek, it was deadly, and for a brief moment in history, it was feared by every Allied tank crew in Europe. The Panther tank, Germany's ambitious answer to the Soviet T-34. A machine designed to dominate the battlefield, but ultimately a symbol of how even brilliance can be crushed by war. Today, we dive into the full story of the Panther, its origins, combat history, strengths, fatal flaws, and the shocking truth of what went wrong. The Panther wasn't supposed to exist, at least not in the form we know it in. Before 1941, German tanks like the Panzer III and IV were dominating the battlefield. But then came Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, and that's where everything changed. The Germans were stunned when they encountered the Soviet T-34. It was sloped, fast, and well-armored, superior to anything the Wehrmacht had in their arsenal. In response, Hitler demanded a new tank. Two companies, MAN and Daimler-Benz, submitted designs. Ironically, Daimler-Benz's proposal looked more like a copy of the T-34, but Hitler picked MAN's design instead. Thus, in 1942, the blueprint of the Panther was born. It wasn't easy. The Panther project was rushed. Political pressure and Hitler's obsession with technological dominance meant corners were cut. Prototypes barely tested, and by the time production began, the factories were already under strain from Allied bombing raids. Despite all this, there was enthusiasm in the Wehrmacht for a tank that could restore Germany's advantage on the Eastern Front. The Panther represented hope, precision, and power, a weapon to turn the tide. Let's break down what made the Panther special. Designated the Panzer V Panther, this medium tank was anything but average. Its main armament, the 75mm KWK 42 L70 cannon, deadly accurate and capable of penetrating Allied armor at long ranges. Its sloped frontal glacis at 80mm allowed it to deflect shells like a much heavier tank. It was powered by a 700 horsepower Maybach V12 engine, giving it a top speed of around 55 kilometers an hour. It was crewed by 5: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator. What really stood out was the optics. German tanks, including the Panther, were equipped with some of the best sights of the war. Tank commanders could spot and engage targets at ranges far beyond what the average Sherman crew could manage. The Panther was intended to operate as a part of a combined arms strategy, working alongside infantry, anti-tank weapons, and artillery. In theory, it was invincible, but in practice, theory often collides with reality. Many field reports praised the Panther's ability to engage and destroy enemy armor at long distances, while highlighting serious limitations in cross-country mobility, particularly in mud and snow, conditions common on the Eastern Front. The Panther's combat debut came at the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, the largest tank battle in history. The debut was a disaster. Out of 200 Panthers sent into battle, over 40 broke down before even engaging the enemy. Many caught fire due to engine problems and weak final drives. Those that did fight, however, proved deadly. Panthers could destroy T-34s before they even got within range. Still, the lesson was clear. This was a powerful tank, rushed into war. Crews were often undertrained, spare parts were scarce, field repairs were nearly impossible, and the Soviet response was swift. IS-2s, new AT guns, and minefields were deployed en masse. Yet, in one-on-one combat, the Panther was unmatched. It could take out a T-34 with a single hit, but no tank fights alone. And the Panther was increasingly alone. Despite setbacks, lessons were learned. Panther production shifted to more reliable models like the OSF-A and G. But by the time these reached the front in significant numbers, the strategic situation had already turned against Germany. How did the Panther fare against enemy's tanks? Against the American M4 Sherman, the Panther was superior in nearly every metric: gun, armor, and optics. The British Churchill had thick armor but lacked firepower. Even the Soviet IS-2 heavy tank, with its 122mm gun, needed to flank or catch the Panther unaware. But here's the twist. Numbers matter more than quality. Panthers were outnumbered 5-1 in many battles, and breakdowns crippled their availability. In Normandy, for example, the Allies could swarm a Panther with Shermans, Typhoon rockets, and artillery. While one Panther might destroy 5 Shermans, eventually it would run out of shells or break down, or simply be surrounded. Even more problematic was the Panther's weak side and rear armor. Allied tank crews were trained to flank and fire at these vulnerable points, and as Germany lost control of the skies, ambush tactics became harder to pull off. What really doomed the Panther wasn't enemy fire, it was German engineering taken to an extreme. Its complex design meant it was difficult to maintain in the field. The transmission failed constantly, the final drive, responsible for transferring power to the tracks, was underbuilt and prone to catastrophic failure, and it consumed fuel at an unsustainable rate. Worse, Panther tanks required railway transport to reach the front lines, as they were too unreliable to drive long distances. But by 1944, Allied bombings had destroyed most of Germany's rail infrastructure. Getting Panthers to the front became an impossible task. Add to that the lack of spare parts, the shortage of trained mechanics, and the increasingly inexperienced crews, and Panthers became less a weapon and more of a burden. Several Panther units had to abandon tanks without firing a shot, not from enemy action, but from mechanical failure alone. The Panther saw extensive action in France in the Ardennes offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. Despite its mechanical flaws, experienced Panther crews could wreak havoc on Allied forces. In ambushes or defensive positions, the Panther was a killer. By this point, the Allies had air superiority. Panther movements were tracked, supply lines were bombed, bridges were blown. At the Battle of the Bulge, Panthers were disguised as American tanks for a deception operation. Though the plan largely failed, still, the Panther's impact on Allied morale was significant. Allied soldiers feared the Panther. It took multiple Shermans or airstrikes to bring one down. But for Germany, it was too little, too late, and by early 1945, only a fraction of the original Panther strength remained on the front lines. Several Panther variants were deployed. The Panther OSF-D, the first version, rushed into service. The OSF-A, with an improved turret and reliability, the OSF-G, heaviest and the most refined version, and the Panther II, a failed upgrade that never saw combat. There were also experimental variants. The Jag Panther, a deadly tank destroyer built on the Panther chassis, armed with an 88mm PaK-43 gun. The Flak Panther, a proposed anti-aircraft Panther that never left the prototype stage. And finally, the Burge Panther, an armored recovery version. The Panther had potential to become a full armored platform, like the Sherman, but Germany never had the resources to fully exploit this versatility. Some historians argue that had Germany standardized the Panther and simplified its production, the war might have been prolonged. But logistical chaos and internal politics ensured that was never possible. Was the Panther the best tank of World War II? It depends. In one-on-one combat, the Panther was devastating, but in a war where logistics, reliability, and numbers decide the victor, it fell short. Still, the Panther influenced post-war designs. The French even operated captured Panthers after the war, and elements of its design inspired post-war tanks like the AMX-13 and the Leopard 1. Even today, tank historians debate whether it was the best German tank of World War II. Ultimately, the Panther was a glimpse at what Germany could have built, if time, resources, and ideology hadn't gotten in the way. Its legacy lives on, not just in museums and war relics, but in the very principles of modern tank design. Balancing mobility, firepower, and protection, the Panther was ahead of its time, but time ultimately ran out. Panther tank was a masterpiece of ambition and engineering, but also a cautionary tale. In war, perfect weapons often fall short to imperfect conditions. So was the Panther Hitler's best tank? Maybe. But sometimes the best tank isn't the one with the biggest gun. It's the one that keeps moving.